Greetings to all in the love and light of the one infinite creator, and welcome to the sixth episode of the Seattle Law of One podcast. Today, our focus is what is going to be what is called in the Law of One the archetypical mind, or also known as the Egyptian Tarot. The archetypical mind is considered by pretty much all students of the Law of One to be one of the most challenging, difficult parts to understand. So if you are new to the Law of One, you might want to skip this episode because there's going to be a lot of stuff we're talking about that you probably will not understand. And if you are familiar with the Law of One, my guess is you probably don't have a real good handle on the archetypical mind either. So hopefully today will be worthwhile and interesting for you. Today, we are going from grade school to grad school. The archetypical mind can be thought of as a blueprint for the evolution of mind, body, and spirit on planet Earth, and in some ways for the whole universe. So how can understanding this blueprint help us in our own spiritual growth or evolution? Let's find out. My name is Jonathan Tong, and I'm facilitator for the Seattle Law of One study group. We can be found on the list of study groups on the L&L Research website page shown on your screen. We do also have a Facebook group, and we do meet twice a week on Zoom at the times shown on your screen. You don't have to live in Seattle or anywhere near Seattle to join our Facebook group or our Zoom sessions. Anyone who's interested and available at that time is welcome to join us. Just contact us at the email address shown on your screen, ask to be put on our mailing list, and you'll get our weekly updates and the Zoom links. We do also have a YouTube channel where we keep recordings of our Q&A sessions with Jim McCarty and Gary and Trish and Austin from the L&L Research Channeling team, as well as the episodes for our podcast. If you are watching an episode on TV, it is set so you can skip ahead by chapters if you don't feel like watching the whole thing from beginning to end. And if you're watching on your computer, below the title of the video, you should be able to see a list of topics and timestamps. Just click on the timestamp and you can skip to topics that are of interest to you. So, as I said, today our focus is going to be on the archetypical mind, and let's meet our panelists. Panelists, would you please let our viewers know who you are and where you're calling from, starting with Edgar?
Hi, I'm Edgar Rodriguez, and I'm calling from Southern California, Mission Viejo area. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
It's so great to have you here. And Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy, and I'm calling from Cornwall in southwest England.
Nice. And Parsa?
Hello, I'm Parsa. I'm calling from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And I know the panelists here are, you could say, experts in the archetypical mind, so it's going to be a good conversation, hopefully a lot to learn.
Nice. And Heather?
And I'm Heather Stubbs. I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Nice. Well, thank you all panelists for being here. In spite of what Parsa said, I would say none of us are experts here on the archetypical mind or the Law of One. Just like everyone watching this, we are just run-of-the-mill wanderers trying to figure shit out just like you. Anything that we say could very well be wrong. So use your own discretion, take what resonates with you and drop what doesn't. So let's talk a little bit about the archetypical mind. What is the archetypical mind? Did want to start out by saying it is not the same archetypes described by Swiss psychiatrist, psychologist, psychotherapist Carl Jung, who is the person who coined the term synchronicity to refer to those freaky little coincidences that happen probably to everyone watching this more than a few times. Archetypes for Carl Jung referred to like character traits that many of us seem to have in our subconscious, whether they're artist or explorer or hero or caregiver. There are thought patterns, behavior patterns that many of us seem to share. The archetypes that we're talking about in the archetypical mind are quite different from these. They are also not the same as the archetypes in the hero's journey described by writer Joseph Campbell. The archetypes, types there kind of refer to events or character traits that might happen on what he described as the ordinary world, where the hero's journey, where the hero goes from the ordinary world to meeting a mentor, crossing the threshold into the unknown world, going through tests, ordeals, and returning to the ordinary world eventually with new powers or abilities. You could say that our spiritual journeys often seem like hero's journey, and there are similarities there. But again, the archetypes described here are quite different from the archetypes of the archetypical mind. It is also worth noting that the archetypical mind, also known as the Egyptian tarot, also known as the major arcana, are not the same as tarot cards that people commonly use for divination or fortune telling. In session 88, Ra did say specifically, the major arcana have no rightful place in divination, but rather are tools for the further knowledge of the self by the self for the purpose of entering a more profoundly, acutely realized present moment. So what is the archetypical mind? You could say that it's part of the deepest parts of our subconscious. Only about 5% of our brain activity is shaped by our conscious mind. 95% of our brain activity is all coming from our unconscious mind. So you could think of your individual mind, not so much as your physical brain, but whatever non-physical part of you is that thinking entity, that's your individual mind. And if you go deep, deep, deep into your subconscious, you could say that there is such a thing as a racial mind, a collective unconscious mind made up of people of your race, whether it's a race on Earth or perhaps a race on some other planet that you incarnated from previously. That means the planetary mind is kind of like the mind made up of all the racial minds of all entities on the planet. The archetypical mind, you could say, is the deep subconscious, unconscious mind of our logos. The term logos was used by Ross sometimes to refer to an entire galaxy and sometimes just as a single sun or star or what we would call a solar system. And you could say that the archetypical mind, as explained by our friends in the Confederation, refers to the unconscious mind, the deep unconscious mind of our particular star, our particular solar system, whatever part of our universe is governed, for lack of a better word, by our local star or sun. And if you put all of the galaxies together, that could be said to form what is the universal, the cosmic mind. If you think of everything in the universe as being basically one large cosmic mind or brain, which is basically what our friends in the Confederation have said, then yes, that pretty much gives you the deepest level of our unconscious mind. So let's go ahead and take a look at some passages about this from our friends in the Confederation. In session 90, question 14, Ross said the archetypical mind is part of that mind which informs all experience. Please recall the definition of the archetypical mind as the repository of those refinements to the cosmic or all mind made by this particular logos and peculiar only to this logos. Thus, it may be seen as one of the roots of mind, not the deepest, but certainly the most informative in some ways. The other root of mind to be recalled is that racial or planetary mind, which also informs the conceptualizations of each entity to some degree. And then in session 91, question 37, Ross says, the archetypical mind, when penetrated lucidly, is a blueprint of the builded structure of all energy expenditures and all seeking without distortion. This as a resource within the deep mind is of great potential to the adept. And then in a channeling session with Quo, and for folks who don't realize, Quo is like a collective entity made up of Ra at 6th density, Latui at 5th density, and Hatan at 4th density. The L&L research channeling team made contact with Quo for the first time about 2 years after the end of the Ra contact, and has continued contact about once or twice a month every year since then, since 1986, all the way up to present. So in this channeling session from 1997, Ross said Quo said, the archetypical mind is a part of the deep mind of each entity. The roots of mind begin with that region closest to the conscious mind's threshold And as one follows these routes, one finds various levels of group mind within the mind: the ethnic group mind, the geographical group mind, the political group mind, and so forth. Deeper than these are the planetary mind, the archetypical mind, and the all mind, or the knower that is the known. The archetypical mind is a set of structures that create a way to think about the self as a metaphysical being. So what the hell does all of that stuff mean? I'm going to turn to my panelists for help on this. Edgar, would you mind starting us off? What do you think? Any thoughts, reflections on anything from any of these passages?
I love 91.37 because you can actually compare this to a circuit board, and you say, wow, the mind body spirit complex is basically kind of, you have a circuit board with all the energy. It's going to have to be going inside that circuit board in a certain way. And then you get all these archetypes that basically you're going to have to stay within that circuit board. You can't go outside. So you can imagine how much you can explore. All the energy is going to be concentrated there. That's what you learn. And then you get all those archetypes being, you can call them, resistance or whatever you like, but everything you do is going to be encompassed. So I really like that 91.37 because it actually gives me an idea that my energy is going to have to move in certain ways. And this is already, there's a blueprint, and that's the circuit board. So that's pretty much the way I see this.
Nice, appreciate that. Any other panelists want to share any thoughts, reflections on this?
Well, Edgar, what you're saying, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought about it, the circuit board, as in these archetypes describing the flow of energy deep within the mind. And that, in a sense, reminds me of why it's justified to have faith here being defined that all is one. Because if there's circuit boards, that's the way energy flows regardless. You can't help but evolve spiritually, but you can also accelerate it, which is what hopefully we're trying to do. Yeah, there's one other thing I was thinking of that could be useful to some people in the law of one, but particularly if someone's just getting into the law of one, like a scientific sort of point, a shift, like an axiom to understand like the Hermetic principle that all minds are connected. And it's that sort of shift that science needs to make. And when you make that shift, channeling, telepathy, it makes a lot more sense. So Jonathan, what you're describing is sort of the way all of our minds are connected, almost like a tree, the deepest root being the all mind of the creator, then the first distortion being what we're talking about, the archetypical mind of the logos, which would refer to the archetypical mind of the major galaxy, then refined by the sub-logos of our sun, which for people new to this, basically the idea is that the sun and the center of the galaxy are both like powerful minds and powerful expressions of the creator's love in knowing itself. So yeah, that's basically what I want to share, that analogy of the tree of mind, which you're talking about, similar to sort of an evolutionary tree, if some people are familiar with that in the audience, where you have common ancestors. Here we have together we'll have common roots, like everyone in this group, because we've spoken with each other and so forth. We probably have a common root, the planetary common root, and so on. And then everyone in the galaxy, the archetypical.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that hard for scientists to conceive of the idea of a collective mind. I mean, if you look at ant colonies or bee colonies or termite colonies, it's really easy to see something that looks like some form of collective mind, or could be thought of as such. Andy, Heather, any thoughts on any of these passages we've looked at so far?
I find it fascinating, interesting, the last quote by Crow about the roots of the mind begin at the conscious level, and then it seems the deeper you go, the wider the mind becomes. It starts to become more and more inclusive the deeper you go. And that's fascinating because we, when we meditate and when we go into the silence, most people, I personally find that to me seems like a very private, personal space. And yet what Crow is saying here is that actually the deeper you go, perhaps the more aware you become of your connectedness with the wideness of what is.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, if you can think of each of us as like a brain cell in a giant cosmic mind, or each galaxy is like a brain cell in a universal mind, yeah, it's really easy to see how we could be connected if you look at it at that deeper level. Heather, any thoughts, reflections to share?
Yeah, I also think it kind of reminds me that, it's all frequencies of light. So the different patterns of the different parts of the mind are different frequencies of light, which are just frequencies that are, faces of the one experiencing itself on a group level, and then, working down to the individual level.
Nice. Yeah, appreciate the opening thoughts there. I did actually want to look at a question that I think would be a really legitimate question to look at early in the game, which is, why should I care? Why should anyone care about the archetypical mind? Why is it worth learning about? There's a few things that come to my mind. I mean, for one thing, I think we all know that so much of what we say and do is influenced by our subconscious or unconscious mind. Then I would think, well, yeah, probably having a better understanding of how your subconscious, unconscious mind works would be a great way to better understand why you're doing the things that you do. Otherwise, I think maybe instead of the blueprint analogy, a map analogy might work better. I kind of like to think of the archetypical mind as like Google Maps or some other GPS map programming. So suppose that you wanted to get to some particular place in Chicago. You probably wouldn't need a map to get there. You'd probably get there eventually from wherever you live right now. But if you had a good GPS mapping program and you knew how to use it, it would certainly help you get there sooner, faster, and maybe avoid some places that you didn't particularly want to go to. And I think the archetypical mind is kind of like that. I also like to think of the archetypical mind as being like the programming software for a video game. You don't need to understand how the programming works in order to play the game or enjoy the game. But if you do understand how the programming works, then you can progress a lot faster and get up to higher levels a lot faster, because now you know like the cheat codes and you know how it works. You understand how the design works. So as I think Edgar mentioned before, for folks who want to accelerate their spiritual growth and evolution, understanding the archetypical mind is a great way to do that. And that is why so many wanderers incarnated to third density in the first place, because they knew there's so much progress that can be made here in third density that would take thousands of years, millions of years in higher densities. So archetypical mind can definitely help with that. Andy, did you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think it's like theory and practice. And if you have the theory, it helps you with the practice. So maybe I'll use cooking as an analogy. You could sort of only cook by following recipes, but you could learn the theories of what textures and what tastes and go with what. And then, based on that theory, be able to then create your own meals or, rescue a meal that's gone wrong. It's basically having that foundational knowledge rather than blindly carrying out acts unconsciously and following. It's beautiful. I love this. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, it is beautiful indeed. And you've always got me with food metaphors for sure. Other panelists, anybody have anything want to share on why anyone should care about the archetypical mind? Why it's worth learning about?
Oh,
Go for it.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Heather. Oh, sorry. What do I want to say? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, one thing. So first of all, to make this point, let me present my understanding and push back on me if I'm wrong. My understanding is what we're talking about here in terms of archetypical mind. It is divided into the archetypes of mind, body, and spirit, but we're not actually talking about the whole of the evolution of the body and the spirit. We're actually talking about the evolution of the intersection of the mind and the body, and the mind and the spirit, and the mind and the mind, because all of these also need to be balanced. Because I think Ra a couple times was like, stress, okay, remember, like, archetypes, we're talking about the deep mind. So anyways, maybe I'm wrong there. I'm not
I
sure.
hadn't thought about it that way, about being the intersections as opposed to separate things. I assumed we were talking about the evolution of the mind and the body and the spirit, both as separate entities as well as intertwined complexes. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that or anything else? Yeah, Edgar.
Yeah, no, actually, all of them are interconnected. Even, when the idea of the archetypes is that eventually your mind is the first thing, and then definitely your body is your avatar. But then the ultimate goal is to change the spirit. The most difficult thing will be I think parts of that regarding the interconnection is all you said about a map, but the interesting thing is that map will keep changing for you. So once you think you got to that place, turns out that, wait a minute, all of this is done. I start again. So if you know how to use the map, how to use every single, roadblock, you're going to be able to go again into a different lesson, which in this case will allow you to grow spiritually. So I definitely agree
So it's a
with
moving map,
a
basically.
moving
A
map.
map
It will
that
never be the
changes.
same. It's different
Yeah.
for you or me. It's different for everybody. Just need to
Yeah.
learn how to read it.
Good point. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I believe I remember somewhere in the raw material them saying that this information will be found most helpful for people interested in healing. I would have to look that up, but so I think not
I
just
don't
healing this,
remember running across that. Was there a
just
particular?
talking about healing that not just the self, but healing the other selves and understanding, I think, where the catalysts lie and where the distortions are within the process.
Oh, interesting. I am not remembering that, but wouldn't surprise me. If it's okay with you folks, I would love to take a look at another question, which is, what is the purpose of the archetypical mind? And session 90, question 16, Ross said, each logos desires to create a more elegant expression of experience of the creator by the creator. The archetypical mind is intended to heighten this ability to express the creator in patterns more like the fanned peacock's tail, each facet of the creator vivid, upright, and shining with articulated beauty. I love that visual of the peacock's tail. I felt like it was worth putting a picture in there because as I'm looking at that picture, I'm picturing each eye spot on the tail being like a logos, being a separate star system or maybe even a galaxy system, and each one being a little bit different. Again, you could think of each logos as being like a different brain cell in a giant cosmic brain, and each brain cell was given the authority to try to take their own original logos and modify it, refine it, try changing this or that to see what happens, because that's what the creator wants to do. The creator always wants to understand itself better, always wants to understand what are the full ranges of possibility into the extreme light, in the extreme dark. Heather, did you have any thoughts on this passage or like what the purpose of the archetypical mind is / was?
I'm not sure if this would be the right place for this, but this had me thinking about the actual history or like the creation of. And Ra does talk about prior to the veil, there were only 3 archetypes, and that was the matrix, potentiator, and the significator. And at some point, the galactic logos decided that it wanted to explore more. And so in order for it to do that, it had to offer the solar logos free will, which would be, as we know, card 22 or the choice. And then that's what split it off into these other cards, into the full 7. So what I thought was interesting about that in itself is I studied a little bit of the Scott Mandelker work, and he equated those first three cards, which mind, body, and spirit, to matrix, potentiator, and significator. And that spirit could be seen as the law of free will. So if you've studied the law of one, you know the first distortion of the law of one is the law of free will. And then the second distortion is the law of love, and that relates to the mind. And then the third distortion is the law of light, which relates to the body. So we had those three to start with. And then in order for the significator, which is like a face of the one, which is a unifying concept, to become complex, it had to be granted that free will. And that's how it decided, you know, we have the ability to, you know, create and manifest with these 7 archetypes.
Indeed. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at all 22 archetypes? As you noted, yeah, each logos had different numbers of archetypes. They tried fewer, less. I believe Rod did say 22 was the highest number that any logos had come up with so far. But there are 7 archetypes of the mind, 7 archetypes of the body, 7 archetypes of the spirit, for a total of 21. And then there was a 22nd archetype called the choice, which was added again as kind of a special thing for reasons which will become clearer later if they're not clear already. Let's take a look at these, shall we? So from the archetypes of the mind, there is archetype number 1, known as the matrix of the mind, or the magician, also known as arcanum number 1, or archetype. I will call them archetype from here on out. The second one is the potentiator of the mind, also known as the high priestess. Archetype number 3 is the catalyst of the mind, also known as the empress. Archetype number 4 is the experience of the mind, also known as the emperor. Archetype number 5 is the significator of the mind, also known as the hierophant. Archetype number 6 is the transformation of the mind, also known as the lovers or the 2 paths. And archetype number 7 is the great way of the mind. The 7 archetypes of the body are number 8, the matrix of the body, also known as justice or balance. Archetype number 9, the potentiator of the body, also known as wisdom or the sage. Archetype number 10, the catalyst of the body, also known as wheel of fortune. Archetype number 11, experience of the body or the enchantress. Archetype number 12, the significator of the body or the hanged man or the martyr. Archetype number 13, the transformation of the body or death. And archetype number 14, the great way of the body. The 7 archetypes of the spirit include the matrix of the spirit or the devil at number 15. Archetype number 16, the potentiator of the spirit or the lightning-struck tower. Archetype number 17, the catalyst of the spirit or the star or hope. Archetype number 18, experience of the spirit or the moon. Archetype number 19, significator of the spirit or the sun. Archetype 20, the transformation of the spirit or judgment. Archetype 21, the great way of the spirit. And as mentioned, there was an additional separate archetype added, archetype number 22, the choice. The vast majority of the information given to Dawn was about the archetypes. I'm going to have a really fun time saying that for the rest of this podcast episode. The majority of the information on the archetypical mind given to Dawn was about the archetypes of the mind. There was a little bit on the archetypes of the body and spirit, but Dawn did pass away before we were able to get more information on that. So suffice it to say, we do not have time today to go into all 22 of those archetypes. What we are going to do instead is focus on 7 of them in particular that seem to be worth discussing. And we could very well end up doing future podcast episodes on any one of these or any of the archetypes that we don't get to. So before we do that, should note that in session 77, question 23, Ross said, "We request that it be constantly kept before the mind, as the candle before the eye, that each mind, body, spirit complex shall and should, and indeed must perceive each archetype, if you use this convenient term, in its own way. Therefore, you may see that precision is not the goal, rather than quality of general concept, complex perception is the goal." So that's basically saying that in these images that we're going to look at, by design, each person is going to see this in their own unique way. So different people will pick up on different things, different people will interpret things differently, and that's not a problem. It is meant to be that way. It's kind of the broad strokes, the general concept of each archetype that would probably be more worth focusing on. Andy, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about how I've been working with the archetypes, because this was the aspect of the raw material that got me the most excited. So I came across the raw material back in 2020. So I've been studying them for about 4 years. And when I first came across them, I was really annoyed that they didn't go through all 22 cards. And so I was so hungry for anything I could get. And one of the books I read recommended that I spend at least 3 days on each archetype. And I read and read, and then and I still felt I couldn't get enough. So I just went through the cycle again, reading different books. And I just kept doing this repeatedly for the last 4 years. And this year I decided I won't put a time frame on it. I'm just going to meditate on it and see what comes to me. And actually, that has been more powerful than anything I've read. And I feel that reading too much can be a hindrance, because there were times when I was doing all that reading and there was a part of me that felt, right, you're ready to move on to the next card now. But I felt I couldn't, because I hadn't finished the chapter on that particular card. So it sort of held me back as well. And also, it didn't matter how much I read until I had my own download, my own aha moment. I would only be able to understand it on an intellectual level. And also, having said that, I've been participating in the discussion group on Zoom, and we've been going through the archetypes and doing a card each week. And I found that in the sharing, the most powerful comments come from people who've had personal experiences working with them rather than stuff they've read. But then, having said that, the stuff we've read is the author's personal experiences too. But there isn't a kind of, it's not all set in stone. I think it's very important to work through it ourselves.
Which discussion group is that, Andy, where you're going through each of these one at a time?
It's the Europe Law of One Zoom meetings that are on Sundays. Yeah.
If you don't mind, would you mind putting the link to that group in the comment section when we upload the video so folks can check that out?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Nice. Thank you. Panelists, anybody else had anything they wanted to say before we start looking at the matrix of the mind to focus on for starters?
Yeah, to summarize what Andy's saying, people listening to this, stop listening, go meditate, basically.
Turn off your TV. Yeah. Get the fuck off your computer and start doing something in service to others. Good advice. So the first archetype we're going to look at is the one called the matrix of the mind. Matrix, by definition, means the womb in Latin. It is derived from mother, the same root meaning from the word matriarchy. It's basically where things come from. So you could say the matrix of the mind is where the mind comes from. I'm just going to read through all of these passages together, and then we can kind of share thoughts and reflections on them. So 91.33, Ross said, the matrix of the mind is the unfed conscious mind, the mind without any resource but consciousness, not to be confused with what we may think of as the conscious mind that has already been altered by the processes of potentiation, catalyst, experience, and transformation. In 91.19, they describe the sphere in the picture as the spiritual nature of the object of the will of one wishing to do magical acts within the manifestation of your density. In 91.21, Ross said, the bird in the cage said, the square, whenever seen, is the symbol of the third density illusion and may be seen either as unmagical or in the proper configuration as having been manifested within. That is the material word given life. In 78.3, Ross said, the matrix of the mind is the self-conscious entity, or they said the self-conscious entity is full of the magic of that which is to come. The mind is first of the complexes to be developed by the student of spiritual evolution. And in 71.15, Ra defined magic as the ability to create changes in consciousness at will. In magic, one is working with one's unmanifested self and body, mind, and spirit, the mixture depending upon the nature of the working. Yeah, there's two things that stand out to me as I look at these passages. First of all is that the matrix of the mind is the conscious mind, not to be confused with the unconscious mind, which we're going to see in the next archetype. Secondly is really the conscious mind as being raw and unfiltered. It's the mind that is not filtered by all the conscious thought processes that result in, that we use to filter what comes out of our mouths, for example. And lastly, yeah, it's just the passages that are encouraging us to see ourselves and the universe as magical in nature. That's something you don't really run across in a whole lot of other religious or spiritual texts. But yes, magic is a very strong recurring theme in the Law of One. And I mean, if each of us is in fact the one infinite creator, then I guess that's not really unexpected to have magical and miraculous things be part of our ordinary nature. Parsa, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything from stuff on the screen?
Sure, I can share some thoughts. In a way, this archetype might be one of the most important. Obviously, it's the first one. What I actually associated with is meditation itself. Ra, when asked, for instance, by Don, how would you, for instance, go about applying these archetypes, the tarot? I believe the one example they gave is when the adept's mind becomes full of concepts, the adept can go invoke the matrix of the mind and clear it all out, and then to be freshly potentiated by the high priestess, the second card. So yeah, that's the main thing, that just to stress the importance of meditation, and maybe a type of meditation which would be the type that deliberately goes into mystery. That might be powerful for some people. I'll just mention one more thing. I remember in the Quo channelings, when they were discussing what fourth density is like, they're basically saying, okay, like fourth density, it's all about love, harmony, compassion, etc. But once you have that down and you don't need to worry about that anymore, that actually what it does, it frees people up to go into the mystery. So probably they go way more than we do. But that's the point I'd like to share about meditation.
Well said. And it is all a mystery, to be sure. Heather, any thoughts, reflections to add?
Well, starting with the imagery, I believe this is a male archetype. And so they discuss later, I think, the male is that which gives. It's more of a moving Although this, I think, being the very first archetype, is kind of an unmoving concept. So we see the male. I think the bird in the cage is an interesting image too. And to my understanding, the bird is like all birds are like messengers. So I see that as being like a messenger from the divine. In this particular image, you can see it's surrounded by three dark. The top portion is dark, and then the bottom is the checkerboard. So believing that the bottom portion is polarity, and the bird itself is surrounded by, I would say, what would be more of a negative polarity.
Yeah, fascinating. I know dark and light, positive and negative polarities are recurring themes that come up in a lot of different archetypes. Not surprising, since this is third density, which is all about making that choice between path of light or path of dark. Edgar, any thoughts, reflections to add on anything here?
Well, I personally say this, to me it's always the start, the beginning, the unfed mind that is what it wants to learn, the desire to explore, do, just the beginning of everything, the winner, because it's actually like, what do I do here? This is not good. I'm burning in a world where somebody slapped me. I just was born. They slapped me. They're just, I'm crying. I feel abandoned. I mean, from the beginning, from being a child, you can actually put yourself here. I want to learn. What is this? What do I do? So it's like the beginning to me. Actually associated with the red energy center, because it's when we begin. So that's usually the way I see this archetype when I apply it to my daily lives.
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. But yes, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. Andy, any thoughts, reflections on this one?
It's more of a reflection on what you said about the matrix coming from the word womb and what it's birthing, and what originates from it. And in relation to the other matrices, I've always felt that the matrix of the mind wants to birth understanding and knowledge, whereas the matrix of the body wants to birth balance and harmony, and the matrix of the spirit wants to birth freedom of expression.
Indeed. Yeah, it's just a great reminder that every person looks at these things differently and sees things differently. And I think it's a great thing that people can get together and share what they're seeing. It's like bringing different pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together. Let's take a look at the next archetype, which is the potentiator of the mind. Potentiate refers to increasing the power of something or making it more effective. So in 7834, Ross said the unconscious is indeed what may be poetically described as high priestess, for it is the potentiator of the mind, and as potentiator for the mind is that principle which potentiates all experience. In 7920, they said that great resource, which may be seen as the sea into which consciousness dips ever deeper and more thoroughly in order to create, ideate, and become more self-conscious. In 9212, they said this may aid the adept in grasping the nature of pre-incarnative and incarnative series of choices. They're saying the unconscious mind does actually have a grasp of the pre-incarnative choices that you made that shaped this incarnation. In 9221, they said veil represents the veil between the conscious and subconscious, between matrix and potentiator. In 9324, they said the Ankh symbol, also known as the crux ansata, that cross with a handle that you see at the chest area of the priestess, is a part of the concept complexes of the archetypical mind, the circle indicating the magic of the spirit, the cross indicating that nature of manifestation, which may only be valued by the losing. Thus, the crux sensata is intended to be seen as an image of the eternal in and through manifestation and beyond manifestation through the sacrifice and transformation of that which is manifest. There's two things that really stand out to me from these passages. One is the distinction between the conscious mind and the subconscious or unconscious mind. So the matrix of the mind is basically your conscious, your raw, unfiltered conscious mind, and the potentiator of the mind is the subconscious or unconscious mind, which kind of calls back to that picture we had of the iceberg and the tip of the iceberg. The conscious mind is like the surface of the ocean, and the subconscious mind is what's just below the conscious mind, where you can still see some light shining through. And the unconscious mind just goes down to depths beyond where any light goes. And that's basically what the potentiator of the mind is. It's the unconscious, subconscious mind. The other thing that strikes me about this one is the passage about the Ankh symbol, or the crux ansata. Crosses, 90-degree angles, crossed legs are recurring themes in all 22 of the archetypes. We will see this later in the significator of the body and in the choice archetypes. But for now, it's probably worth noting that, yes, the experience of the mind, archetype number 4, there was a question about the crossed legs of the entity and how that is related to the crux ansata. Ra here said, the cross formed by the living limbs of the image signifies that which is the nature of mind, body, spirit complexes and manifestation within your illusion. There is no experience which is not, there is no experience which is not purchased by effort of some kind, no act of service to self or others which does not bear a price to the entity manifesting, commensurate with its purity. All things in manifestation may be seen in one way or another to be offering themselves in order that transformations may take place upon the level appropriate to the action. Huge Jesus implications with this. It really goes to, the quintessential cross that is such a big part of what we know as Christianity and one of the major world religions, and the whole idea of Jesus sacrificing on the cross. It's really something to see that as not just something that happened probably at some point in Earth's history, but wow, this is something that's wired into the deep subconscious mind of our logos. It's part of the programming for this whole virtual reality that we call 3D existence. That I find that super interesting, and we will definitely revisit this motif when we see it in future archetypes during our episode. Andy, or Edgar, any thoughts, reflections on anything here? Let's see, I believe your mic is muted. You're going to have to unmute.
I'm sorry, my apologies. Going back to what you just said about the crux ansata, also the interesting shape that it's a shape of infinite. So that's something, is embedded in there. Just the sign of infinite at the end of the cross, and then the path, and then something that cross in between. So it definitely, it brings a lot of ideas to your mind. I definitely, like all these passages, they're definitely great, what you're trying to show our viewers. That veil is the main reason why this is so important. The not knowing, and then the not knowing basically is trying to send you the right way based on what you decided before you were born. It's going to try to reach and send that conscious that is right now so hungry, just wanting to learn. It's going to give you the inspiration that will then eventually allow you to progress and learn. But that's, again, in my point of view, is the really good close relationship between the potentiator of mind and the matrix, where one is trying to learn, the other one is sending you in the right directions, the way I see it.
Nice. Andy, anything to add? Any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yeah, I love the Ankh symbol and the cross. When I see the cross, I always think of it as the intersection between time and space, which is about being at the center of the cross and in the now and in the present space as well. And by being that, in a way, there is that sacrifice of all that's been and thinking about the future. When you're really in the now, one has to be there and not think about the past or the future. And being present in the present space also involves not desiring to be somewhere else or thinking about some place that we've been in the past or will go to in the future. And that's the key. And the thing about the potentiator of the mind, I feel, is that it seems to embody every other card in the major arcana as well.
How so? Not sure if I picked up on that.
That whole process of birthing, coming into being, catalyst, the experience, and then the kind of getting to the apex of the experience, which is the significator, and then fading from that, for instance, in the transformation card, and then being kind of rebirthed into something greater. If
that's fascinating. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that makes sense. I can see that.
And that like when Ra talks about the sacrifice and then the manifestation through sacrifice and transformation, for me that is the whole entire journey of each of the archetypes.
Fascinating. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Parsa, thoughts, reflections?
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I actually want to quickly circle back to another thing Andy said, circling back to it, because to a lot of people it's so obvious, but it wasn't to me. So I want to actually make it concrete. This thing I've recently discovered about the deep meaning of getting into the present moment. People are advanced meditators and on the spiritual path, a lot of them understand this intuitively. I've only recently started to understand there's one way of coming to the moment, let's say that's superficial, that honestly, I'm just going to be completely honest, might actually involve mindfulness and awareness of sense perceptions, which is stuck in space-time. But there's another sense where you go into, as Andy was saying, time, space, where somehow you're so deep into it that you touch infinity somehow, as in all times are one in a sense. And the characteristic of that, from my experience, has been a sense of openness, of freedom, and an expansiveness, whereas the other approach that I had perhaps at certain points used to getting into the moment, which involved an observation of sense perception, kept me stuck in a very limited space. Recently discovered this infinite time. Oh, and many people might not know what time space is. It's the metaphysical dimensions, place where all time is one. I mean, all time is one regardless, but the sense where you get in there is your understanding of linear time and linear space dissolves into this vast expanse, and really a lot of.
And that's a super important point, I think, that you're bringing up about how the present moment is really kind of that intersection, perhaps, between space-time and time-space. I think it was said somewhere that cross, the shape of the cross, is basically that. The horizontal part represents space-time, or our physical, visible world as we understand it, and the vertical line represents time-space, or the metaphysical universe, the part of the universe that we can't really see with our eyes. And that the present moment, as I think you're alluding to, is really kind of right there at the intersection between those two. That's a super important point, I think. Parsa, I think I cut you off. Was there something else that you had intended to say before that? I just wanted to highlight that.
Oh, yeah, thank you. There's a lot I could say, but we can keep the conversation flowing and we can speak about that.
Cool. Thank you so much. Heather, was there anything you wanted to add before we move on?
Yeah, sure. I love this card. I think it's so beautiful. And I love where they talk about where Ra says it's the sea into which consciousness dips, right? So it's really like the matrix dips into the potentiator, and then we see the Ankh symbol, which is the feminine. I connect that to the feminine. And interesting is where it's positioned. And so if you were to think about the chakra system, it's, it's like the second ray is looping, the heart is looped there. So it's like the heart is looped and it's connected to the second ray. So it's like the fourth ray is able to assist the second ray, I think. It's kind of what I get from
think
that.
you're right.
Yeah,
I think there was another archetype somewhere later where they are saying that intersection of the vertical and horizontal is right at the heart chakra.
at the heart
It describes
chakra.
it just the way you're describing it, I think.
That's very beautiful. And then of course you see the right side, the right pillar is light, and then the left pillar is dark. And again, that's her right and then her left. And so again, looking at polarity there.
Super important. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for highlighting that. Again, yeah, you'll see that same recurring motif of black and white, light and dark in several of these archetypes. Yeah, and as Heather was suggesting, a lot of really important things to understand, I think, related to the feminine principle shown in this archetype. There was actually another passage from a Quo channeling session that I think is really well worth looking at. Folks who are familiar with the Law of One may or may not have seen this before. This was in response to a question about the potentiator of the mind in 2009. Quo said, "The male energy is that which reaches. The feminine energy is that which awaits the reaching. The male energy is that which seeks to know. The feminine energy is that which by direct insight and intuition already knows. It is as if the male principle hungers and thirsts for the direct awareness of the one infinite creator, yet with all his heart, with all of his energy and strength, with every priestly attribute, the male principle is denied the book of life. The feminine principle, on the other hand, dwells in a state of rest, aware in a direct way of the energies of infinity and eternity. The moon sings through the blood of the woman. The cycle of the seasons echo in her, and to the biological feminine is given intimate awareness of the ocean of life as she conceives and carries a new life within her. The male principle, for all of his energy and dominant strength, can only come next to this ocean of life, sit upon the shore, and wonder at the mystery which femininity encompasses. The basis of these cultural prejudices, of which the one known as Jim have spoken, lies in the inability of men, biological men, an archetypical masculine principle, to reach his goal, which is to know. Think of the figure in the Tarot image of the potentiator of the mind, shielding the book of life within her veil, and we believe that you have the essence of why this prejudice exists. The truth is, it is to the female principle that spiritual knowledge is given, not as the one who tells, but as one who carries. It is not that the biological female is more knowledgeable of spiritual things than the male. It is that the very essence of femininity, the archetypical nature, contains knowledge in a direct sense of the truth for which the male grasps endlessly, but which he can never completely uncover. For it resides in the mystery with which women are comfortable and men are not. The easiest and most direct way towards reversing this situation, which is unconsciously felt by men, is to dominate the women who contain the key to the mystery of life. It is not a logical movement. It is not a rational decision. It is based on fear as the truth, but shall always be dependent upon women who contain that truth. Really super fascinating passage to me that really puts in a different light all of the things that we see playing out in the political arena, at least for the United States, in terms of those we would describe as politically conservative, just seem really intent on controlling the reproductive systems of women, as if they realize, as they're talking about in this passage, how behind that veil, which is on covering her right shoulder, I believe, is what they're suggesting. Behind that veil is what we call the book of life, and it just contains the knowledge and understandings of how the universe works. And men can never access it. So the best they can do is to try to keep women from accessing that power. They know that that is a power of life that they can never have. So the best they can do is control it and keep women from being able to exercise it. Heather, any thoughts to share on this passage or anything here?
I think it just,
there we go.
yeah, I think it just, it just to me goes back to, that the passage where they talk about the sea, right? And so the woman is kind of representative of the sea, and that's the unconscious, which, the matrix must dip. And I love that in this particular passage, it says that she's shielding the book of life with her veil, which I didn't get that until I read this passage by Quo. So I thought that was beautiful.
Indeed, yeah. Andy, any thoughts, reflections?
I have to say, as a woman, I love this. I want to put, print out like flyers, and every time my husband disagrees with me, I'm going to go, see,
For sure.
you know, every mansplainer, I'd be like, shut up, look. But then having said that, there's masculine and feminine in all of us. So I can't claim that I already know. And I suppose how I interpret this passage is that most women are more comfortable with their intuitive knowledge than men are, and that kind of knowing sort of gives us more a more solid faith, I suppose, that everything's going to be okay. And it's precious, I think, and I think a lot of men who are willing to embrace that energy, you can see that as well, that knowing, and there's a kind of sense of peace and calmness in the face of whatever is going on, social turbulence, political turbulence. That feminine energy can be present in men, and it can be absent in women as well. So I would say, beyond the biological, it's more of an energy.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And our friends in the Confederation have spoken many times expressing what you're saying, that everyone has some amount of male, female energy inside them. And yet they also acknowledge more than a few times that, our society, our culture as a whole seems to be very overbalanced towards male energy of aggression and bellicosity, and that what's really needed at this time is to really rebalance that energy with the feminine. That's really what's needed at this time. And that's something we're going to be looking at a future podcast episode, not that far into the future. Edgar, Parsa, did you have anything to add on this before we take a look at the transformation of the mind?
Yeah, I can add some things, I guess. Some interesting things about the ontology of the law of one material, as Andy was alluding to. The spirit, or the part of us that reincarnates, it's non-binary, I guess you could say. It's not male or female. So within this ontology, that's not a deep inherent characteristic of us. In fact, in order to be balanced, you need to balance your female and male, and that's one of the important disciplines talked about in the law of one material, the balancing disciplines of the mind and the body. And something else that's interesting, that's slightly I'm about to say it, so I might as well say it. I hesitate a bit because I think I remember in one of the Quo channelings, they said, oh, maybe we shouldn't talk about this. But I remember in one of the Quo channelings, somewhere in the channelings, they had said what the Confederation, when I'm talking about the Confederation of Planets in service to the one infinite creator, a group of positively oriented extraterrestrial civilizations, more advanced, helping Ra being one of them. They had said their hope for Earth was that at this point we would have a feminine symbol for the divine. I don't know if you guys if you remember that. And generally,
I do.
societies have feminine symbols for the divine, so they worship a goddess as opposed to a god. Let's say that they're.
I remember that. Yeah. I think we mentioned that very passage either in the last episode or the episode before. I don't remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's no better way to get somebody's attention than to tell them maybe we shouldn't be saying this. It's like, spill the tea, motherfuckers! What are you trying to say?
But of course, within this ontology, the infinite being is undistorted, so it's a unified field of whatever, part of it.
Of course. Of course. Edgar, did you have anything you wanted to share before we move on? Or
Oh, well, beautiful said, I just want to add that I always associate the potentiator with the orange ray, the energy center, for the reasons you just mentioned. You can see the relationship, the male, how it's interacting, and it's beautiful. Everybody said such beautiful things, Andy especially. But yeah, I always, there's a specific passage is so enlightening in that regard, because you can see that we both have both energies, just we need to listen to our intuition and stop dividing ourselves. That's the way to go.
indeed. Yeah, it reminds me of what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode in terms of understanding the programming of a video game or understanding the design of our whole third density experience. When you see this interplay of male and female energies and conscious and subconscious mind, I think maybe, at least for me, it gives me a better appreciation for what I am seeing around me. So let's take a look at the transformation of the mind. In session 7940, Ross said, the student is transformed by the need to choose between dark and light paths. In 100.6, they said the male is the conscious mind, the female is unconscious, and must choose between the virginal or prostituted principles of deep mind to pursue. In 99.8, they said, many use the trunk and roots of the mind as if that portion of mind were a badly used prostituted entity. Then this entity gains from this great storehouse that which is rough, prostituted, and without great value. Those who turn to the deep mind, seeing it in the guise of the maiden, go forth to court it. The courtship has nothing of plunder in its semblance, and may be protracted, yet the treasure gained by such careful courtship is great. The right hand and left hand transformations of the mind may be seen to differ by the attitude of the conscious mind toward its own resources as well as the resources of other selves. And in 1989, Kuo said, to seek the presence of the Infinite One, this is a great aid, and we suggest that we do this most gently, most lovingly, opening to the subconscious as a suitor with bouquet and candy, knowing the spirit to be sweet and precious, the nature of love. On November 16th, 2003, Kuo said, the self within is as the unread book, the unknown mystery, and the archetypical tarot images that is pictured as the woman who is veiled. That's the potentiator of the mind. One can barely see the book of wisdom that she holds at her heart. You are attempting to lift the veil from the book of self. How would you court that self within? On February 12, 2011, they said, the most effective spiritual practice is to believe in the spiritual practice and to seek it as does a lover its mate. It is very helpful and healthy for the spirit to yearn and to crave for the presence of the one creator. I love the imagery in these passages of the suitor with bouquet and candy. And again, this is kind of what we're looking at as the crux of third density, of making the choice between the light path and the dark path, the positive path and the negative path. And in this image, we're seeing that the conscious mind has to choose between the two paths of how to approach the subconscious mind, to rape and pillage and plunder it and to take what you want by force, or to do it as if you were courting a lover with bouquet and candy, knowing this is a sweet maiden, and to do it with love and respect. It really reminds me of how humanity has approached planet Earth over the millennia, that rather than taking resources with love and respect and blessing to planet Earth, just basically approaching it to rape and pillage and plunder her and take whatever you want with no regard for what you're doing to her. It's a really powerful image, I think. Any thoughts on this, Parsa?
Oh, I have so much thoughts. I mean, this transformation of the mind was the most impactful for me. I found it the most interesting, and I came back to it the most often. Maybe highlighting one thing, sorry if you mentioned or if it was mentioned, that the male at the center, his eyes are closed, and the two females who guide the way, their eyes are open. And this description, so basically the male is us, our consciousness, us as seekers, and that feminine aspect is the deep archetypical mind that can show us the way but doesn't force us to go that way. That's our choice. That's how we process the catalyst. Specifically how they described it as virginal versus prostituted. Wow, that is huge because it touches on purity, and specifically positive purity. And positive purity, first of all, I guess because this is within the context of our society, I think a contemplation of purity is so essential. But when I talk about purity, I'm not talking about how society would view purity. Ironically, I think the way society sees sexual purity, not to judge it necessarily, but to my eyes, it's almost the definition of impurity, because purity has the characteristic of non-judgment, but it's much more than just non-judgment. It's an energy, it's an essence. It's a really beautiful thing. And I think the choice of service to self or service to others, I've thought of it as, what type of beauty do you want to enjoy? Do you want to enjoy like an easy, sort of cheap, like matte surface level beauty of the ego? You know, you see the feminine on the left being less clothed, maybe symbolizing, you know, easiness, you know, or whatever, or more obvious sort of a path. And that's the negative path, is so much more readily available. Like you can choose to be petty, you can choose to be materialistic or whatever. But then there's another choice. And why would you want to choose the other choice? Well, because if you choose the other choice, the beauty you get to experience is not two-dimensional, to say the least. It's not it's multi-dimensional, and it inspires you. And I think,
Awesome.
yeah. And maybe
Yeah, I think they're saying here, you get what you ask for. If you want something cheap and prostituted, then that's what you're going to get. If
Can
you
I
want
share one more
something
thing,
deeper and
Dr.
more
Brown?
meaningful, that's what you'll get.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Just one thing I think would be really useful, possibly. This idea of approaching this path, or anything, your thoughts even, with gentleness, I think is so important, and such a powerful thing, because I think of it as a hack. Like it's operationalized, like it's a technical thing. You can't force yourself to be loving, but you can technically be gentle with yourself in your thoughts and your actions, etc. And somehow when I'm gentle, it's like a hack to get some love. And I never thought of its actual relationship with this archetype, but maybe that's why, like, you're choosing the positive path when you choose to be gentle. Maybe. And it's really just like a little hack I use sometimes.
I think that is a super helpful word, gentleness, to use. And I think that really does very much encapsulate what you're talking about here and what Ra is talking about. Heather, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Well, I'm not sure if other people have any other information on this, but looking at the sun and then the figure in the sun, and they're pointing the arrow, and it looks like the arrow is pointing not directly at the woman on the left-hand path, but it is pointed in that direction. So, I don't necessarily know if that, creature is positive or negative, or what we could look at that creature like, but it does seem like maybe the arrow represents some sort of, I would say, information, almost like some sort of information would be coming, from the solar logos.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up, since it is a really prominent figure in this image. And it is worth noting in 99.8, Rod did refer to that entity with the arrow, described as a genie with the arrow, and said, "This arrow is not the arrow which kills, but rather that which in its own way protects. Those who choose separation, that being the quality most indicative of the left hand or service to self path, are protected from other selves by a strength and sharpness equivalent to the degree of transformation which the mind has experienced in the negative sense. Those upon the right-hand path have no such protection against other selves, for upon that path the doughty seeker shall find many mirrors for reflection in each other self it encounters." The way I was interpreting that was that the genie with the arrow is like protecting the person who's on the service to self path, meaning it's going to take care of its enemies in a way commensurate with how much this entity has polarized to the left. The more it polarizes, the more protection it has. And they're saying the entity on the right has no such protection because the right-hand path of service to others is all about trust and seeing all others as reflections to the self. It is kind of worth noting, as long as you're bringing this up, Heather, sorry. On a side note, if we go back to the experience of the mind archetype, if you look, you'll see there's a little cat in the corner of the box. And in 95.23, Ross said, "The great cat guards in direct proportion to the purity of the manifestations of intention and the purity of inner work done along this path." In 95.24, they said, "The seeker which has purely chosen the service to others path shall certainly not have a variant apparent incarnational experience. There is no outward shelter in your illusion from the gusts, flurries, and blizzards of quick and cruel catalysts. However, to the pure, all that is encountered speaks of the love and light of the one infinite creator. The cruelest blow is seen with an ambience of challenges offered and opportunities to come. Thusly, the great pitch of light is held high above such a one, so that all interpretation may be seen to be protected by the light." I kind of connect this back to what we saw here, where it seemed like they were saying that unlike those on the left-hand path, the folks on the service to others path don't have some genie with a bow and arrow protecting them. They really have to trust. But at the same time that they're saying here that there is protection for those on the service to others path, doesn't mean you're not going to have what seem to be negative experiences. You're still going to have to suffer what seems to be bad things happening. But to those who are polarized most purely, they'll see everything as a blessing and thanksgiving instead. That's my interpretation of it. Heather or Andy or anyone else, do you have any other thoughts, ways of looking at this passage?
Are we talking about the cat in the experience of the mind, or are we still talking about the transformation of the mind?
We're still talking about the transformation of the mind. The cat was just an aside to kind of go with what they were saying about the genie with the arrow.
Yeah, I just want to offer a different approach to the figures on the left and the right. One way of looking at it is to think of it as external stimuli. You know, do we go for like this the spiritual maiden, the obvious kind of image is meditation, purity, or do we go for the prostitute? But from Quo's passage at the end in the screen that you're sharing here, I think what stands out is that actually it's about the same thing. They both represent the same thing, and the difference is not outward, but the difference comes about because from the way that we use it. So both these women are representations of the trunk and roots of the mind, but we can use the trunk and roots of our mind as a tool for seeking and going deeper, or we can use it and train ourselves to be really quick-witted, to dominate someone else. But they are the same thing, and and the different images represent not different things, but they represent different ways of perceiving the one thing, and different ways of using it. And the attitude of the conscious towards its own resources then leads to the transformation of the mind. And I want to highlight the word transformation in this card. It's like, you know, does this card represent the process of the transformation, or does it represent what the end of transformation results in? And
Interesting.
one thing that really frustrated me in the Ra material is that Ra asked, I think more than once, about the crossed arms, and we never quite got an answer, because Don did speculate and Ra's like, not really, and then he never went back to it.
If I remember correctly, there was a passage where Ra was saying the triangle represents, it's the shape of transformation. So the triangle that was formed by the cross-armed was meant to be a symbol of transformation. And I think they said triangles appear 2 other times in this image, which I think I can see in the pathways at the bottom of the card seem to show triangles as well. That's my recollection of it. Does anybody else have any other thoughts or reflections on what Andy shared? Yeah, Edgar?
Yeah, no, I see what Andy's saying. I actually agree. It's just you think of yourself in a position where your perspective is a certain way, and then you're facing this choice where it's going to be painful. You're going to have to leave what you already believe on, what you probably feel like this was my dogma, and then you go, like, you know, introducing the law one to me was a painful thing in the beginning, and then you have the choices of deciding, you know, do I go this way because I'm really comfortable right here? Look, I have 2 girls, right? I mean, I have in my world is really comfortable around me, but I need to change my perspective because what I see right now is different, a different truth than what I had before. And Andy is right. It's obviously, you know, it's an illusion. So you're making a choice because you're going to build again from this other point and then progress in your path and your voyage and the way you're going. So this card is definitely that transformation that you suffer when you decide that all the circle you're going in, the previous 4 or 5 cards, you got to a point where it's boring and you have to build from anew. So let's do it. That's the way I see it.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think this is why I really enjoy having panel discussions on these Law of One topics, because it's way more interesting hearing like 4 or 5 people's perspectives on it than just one person's. Let's go ahead and take a look at the significator of the body. That is one of my favorite archetypes of all. And for this one, we are going to look at a Quo channeling session from February 13, 2010. The question was about the significator of the body, and here Quo said, "The body is an instrument of sacrifice. When a brand new life is brought forth into your world, it has chosen to leave a place of full awareness where all is known that can be known in order to plunge itself into the thoroughgoing system of illusions that you call physical life. Implicit in that infant advent into the world of earth is its eventual departure from that same earth world. It is a time spent in what this instrument would call the valley of the shadow of death. Being born into physical incarnation is that which is done responsibly and carefully, with great thought and for a reason. Entities such as those to whom we speak do not tumble into life with no thought for the shape and texture of the life to come. Many of those, indeed virtually all of those who have come into incarnation in the past little while, have done so with the great hope of being able to be part of the good upon planet Earth at this time. It is a time when, as this instrument would call it, the fields are ripe with harvest. And as incarnation is contemplated, There is the hope in each breast that they may be harvesters, that they may know and see and understand the centrality of love, that they may reach out during their time here to change darkness to light, sadness to joy, fear to love, dissension to unity, anger to peace, that they may be agents of the truth, which every cell of every body carries within it, and which within the illusion of third density earth is veiled from the conscious awareness of each person who has chosen to come into incarnation. We would say to the one known as T1 that it is a sacrifice of tremendous meaning. It is not the idiot play of chaotic chance, nor is it the soulless repetition of destiny in which free will has no part. It is a dance of the entity that is upon the wheel of life, enjoying the darkness and the light, the dark night of the soul, and the illumination of epiphany, moving from transformation to transformation. It is the hope and the intention of the soul before entering into the valley of the shadow, that within those shadows, paradoxes and mysteries of life as experienced upon your planet, there will be that moment of remembrance of why this sacrifice was undertaken. And it is hoped that that moment of remembrance may so illumine the soul within incarnation that the remainder of the incarnation will be one of joy, peace, and bliss. For the mists have been penetrated, the mystery has been solved, and the answer to sacrifice is love. For love moved each of you to embrace this experience, this parenthesis in eternity, as the one known as Joel calls it. And within this tiny shape of a life, this momentary span of your years, once you have awakened to the love within you, you have the opportunity so to shape and intend and offer your life that the riches of that love shall spring forth anew every day, falling like coins from your pockets and turning your world into heaven. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get through that passage without getting a little bit choked up, because it is a really beautiful passage that chokes me up just about every time that I read through it. Did want to note a couple things. The Joel that is referred to at the end here is not pop singer Billy Joel, much as great as that would be, but it was a writer named Joel Goldsmith, who was, I think, what could be described as a Christian mystic, whom Carla was quite familiar with. But yes, certainly did want to notice here that the crossed leg of the hanging man really calls back to the crossed leg that we saw before in archetype number 4 of the emperor, and calls back to what we said about the cross on the chest of the potentiator of the mind. That whole crossed leg 90-degree angle thing clearly symbolizes sacrifice. And what they're saying here, I believe, is that the very act of incarnating here on third density is an act of sacrifice, because you're coming from a place where you know everything to a place where you know nothing. You know nothing of what's going on behind the veil. So everything that you do here can be considered an act of love, an act of sacrifice for the Creator and for Mother Earth, or however you want to do it. It's just a really beautiful thing that, again, also calls back to the entity known as Jesus, and realizing that the cross, those 90-degree things that were what he used to show us that there was another way, another life beyond Earth, and that he was willing to sacrifice himself. Not just on Earth, but according to our friends in the Confederation, reincarnated on many, many different planets, helped many, many different civilizations, and as I understand it, was crucified on every fucking one of them, or like darn near close to them. There is something very archetypical about the shape of the cross and the sacrifice that goes with it. Any thoughts, reflections to share on this, Andy?
Yeah, it's a fascinating card for me, because I think I've met a lot of people in the Law of One community who have, as wondrous, tend to be overgivers. They give too much of themselves, and Carla, for instance, there's Ra and Quo mentioned that more than more than a lot of times that, you know, she has a tendency towards martyrdom. And there's that, but because we live in such a complex veil, that sacrifice isn't always what it seems. You know, there's a lot of people out there with a victim mentality who perceive their lives as sacrificial, but the crucial thing that is hindering the progress is their unwillingness to sacrifice the stories of themselves as the victim. And the biggest kind of sacrifice one can make, I feel, is our own stories, because stories are so powerful. We create stories about ourselves and our people, and these stories get passed on from generation to generation. And in reality, we're more willing to, we die for our stories. We would sooner give up our lives and our comfort than to give up our stories. And in a way,
I never thought of it that way. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's why people are so willing to send their children to war and, you know, to, you know, fight to uphold a story. And at the end of the day, it's actually quite easy to sacrifice physical material things because they can be retrieved again. But to sacrifice our stories and to sacrifice the ego is much, much harder. But
That is
then,
fascinating. Yeah, I'd never thought of it that way. Appreciate your sharing. Do you mind if I move on to Edgar?
Yeah, sure, go
Edgar,
ahead.
did you have any thoughts, reflections on this passage?
Well, you know, the sacrifice that we are making to be here, definitely that's going to be, you know, that card, the significator is your avatar, you. And the body, definitely, you know, your body's been suffering since you were born. That definitely, you can see it in all kinds of, you know, what's around you, but again, your perspective is eventually to allow you to awaken your perspective and realize that despite all the suffering, you're trying to seek love. And then all the other cards basically, and this one here, this one is important because it's the reflect of what you went already through the first 4 cards. You know, this is going to help you to find really who you are and what is your fate and where you're going. So this is a really important card to me.
Indeed. Yeah, appreciate that. Heather, any thoughts, reflections to add?
Yeah, such an interesting card. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the card is clearly this is the only card where they're upside down. It's also called Significator of the body. So if you think about it, the chakra system in this particular card is upside down, which is kind of when you're looking at the other cards prior to it. So we've come from, you know, matrix of the body, potentiator of the body, catalyst of the body. And so now we're at significator of the body. This is where I would say distortions in the mind will be reflected within the body. And should one, because I do yoga, this kind of reminds me of a yoga pose, right? So like,
yeah, for sure.
You know, like if you stand on your head, you get a different perspective. So in a way,
That's fascinating. I never thought of that. Never occurred to me.
I kind of relate this card to like, okay, like I understand these things are, these hidden things are coming up and I'm going to need a different perspective. And what better thing to do than to stand on my head?
Wow.
There you go.
Fascinating. Never thought of any of that. That is really fascinating to me. Thank you so much for sharing. Parsa, did you have anything to add on this before we take a look at our next archetype?
Sure. So speaking of the yoga, and it's just a silly thing, one time I was entertaining the possibility, oh, like what if Ra was actually telling us like the solution to all our illnesses is inversion therapy, you know, just hang upside down. I think I shared that to our group, but it did not gain traction, unfortunately.
can't imagine why. Makes perfect sense to me.
Jonathan, is it true that this card is significant for you? Because I think I kind of remember you mentioning it, that this one was significant for you.
Only insofar as I've probably said more than a few times that this is one I have a special vibe for.
Well, do you want to elaborate?
Oh, I think only because that whole idea of the cross shape and the sacrifice is something that resonates with me, and and I think it probably applies to everyone in some degree. I think perhaps one of the parts that really resonates with me now is that part that I highlighted in yellow, where they said, which is the hope and intention of the soul before entering into the valley of the shadow, that within those shadows, paradoxes, and mysteries of life as experienced upon your planet, there will be that moment of remembrance of why the sacrifice was undertaken. It just reminds me of so many people who have no idea why they're here on this planet, and including wanderers who really did come here with a very specific mission and really hope to do it, but because of the veil of forgetting and because maybe they have not gone through enough incarnation cycles yet that they forget who they are, and they forget why they're here. And I've always loved movies where the main character remembers who they are and why they're here, and like The Lion King is one of my favorite Disney movies. So that scene towards the end when he finally remembers who he is and why he's here, that just gets me weepy every fucking time I see that. So I think that's a big takeaway lesson for me in this card. Thank you for asking, Parsa. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one, which I'm going to have to say is another one of my favorite archetypes out of the whole bunch. There's just so much here to be mined. In 80.8, regarding the matrix of the spirit, Ra said, "You may with some fruitfulness consider the possibilities of moonlight. You are aware that we have described the matrix of the spirit as a night. The moonlight then offers either a true picture seen in shadow or chimera and falsity. The power of falsity is deep, as is the power to discern truth from shadow. The shadow of hidden things is an infinite depth in which is stored the power of the one infinite creator." Chimera refers to a mythological Greek monster, which was like a composite of several different animals and creatures. So I think they're referring to power of the moonlight offers either a true picture or something that's basically an illusion, is what they're saying here, I believe. In 80.10, the questioner asks, now the 15th archetype, which is the matrix of the spirit, has been called the devil. Can you tell me why that is so? Ra says, I am Ra. We do not wish to be facile in such a central query, but we may note that the nature of the spirit is so infinitely subtle that the fructifying influence of light upon the great darkness of the spirit is very often not as apparent as the darkness itself. The progress chosen by many adepts becomes a confused path as each adept attempts to use the catalyst of the spirit. Few there are which are successful in grasping the light of the sun. By far, the majority of adepts remain groping in the moonlight, and as we have said, this light can deceive as well as uncover hidden mysteries. Therefore, the melody, shall we say, of this matrix often seems to be of a negative and evil, as you would call it, nature. Adept generally refers to someone who's proficient. They're at an advanced level of something. So you could say that an adept in the law of one is someone who is at a advanced level of understanding, for lack of a better word. There are just so many little phrases and passages here that really strike me as fascinating. Maybe I'll start with a couple and then I'll pass it on to panelists. But that part about to embrace falsity, to know it, to seek it, and to use it gives a power that is most great. It really, for me personally, it really just reminds me of the gaslighting that we see so much from Donald Trump and his followers, and from Fox News, this really 1984 type psychological warfare of telling us you did not see what you saw with your own eyes. You did not see Trump supporters storming the Capitol, attacking people, trying to overturn election results. Fox News and Trump, they've described them as peaceful tourists just sightseeing through the Capitol, or they've described them as Biden supporters or violent Black Matters supporters. Again, I'm sure there are many people in the Law of One community who would disagree with me on this, but I kind of saw the videos for myself. I kind of saw what happened on January 6th. So to try to like gaslight me into believing that that didn't actually happen or that the election was stolen, it just reminds me of this passage, because it's not that they don't know that what they're saying is false. Fox News people testified in court saying we knew that what we were saying about the stolen election was a lie. So to me, this is a great example of embracing falsity, knowing it, seeking it, and using it. It gives a power, which is most great to those who do that. Let me pass it over to the panelists. I don't know where we are in the order. Andy, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite cards, actually, because it's helped me so much to work on my shadow self, and to realize the devil isn't outside of myself, it's within me. So in your example of January 6th and the political leaders, it's an opportunity, I would say, when you see something like that, not to look at your own reaction and then the part that angers you and reconcile with that. So that is the devil, rather than, because the devil that you see outside you can't really do anything about, but the anger in you and the fear, that devil within you, you can form a relationship with and reconcile and heal through that work. So thank you, Donald Trump, for giving us the opportunity to see the aspects of ourselves that, wouldn't otherwise be available.
Indeed. And you had Boris Johnson there in the UK, which, as far as I can understand, not that different from what I can tell. It is a fun
now. Yeah.
It is a funny thing that, of all things, to refer to the matrix of the spirit, they would use a dragon and a devil. It's definitely not what I would have thought of. Parsa, any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
Yeah, for sure. The way I think of this one is sort of as existential terror, which, could be, you can think of as the womb, let's say, of spirit or spiritual progress, and specifically like spiritual progress. And I think this archetype is invoked, whether we like it or not, when something terrible happens in someone's life, a crisis or something like that. They go to this archetype, kind of forced into it, and a lot of growth can come out of it, but also a lot of reaching for false light, let's say, false light. So I guess some things you can reach for, maybe they echo into eternity, but then some things you can reach for, unfortunately, are, as a Confederation calls it, half of that, which is not. So you might get excited about something which is not going to last, or you might, on the other hand, get excited about something which does last. And how do we know? In the illusion, and it's particularly pronounced, I think, because of the depth of illusion we're in. So it's hard to discern except by the vibe, maybe. That could be a whole conversation. How do you discern the proper inner sort of perspective? You gotta feel your way, probably. You can't logically figure it out.
That groping in the moonlight phrase is something that has really stuck with me for a long time. It just seems to speak so well to what I think you're saying, which is that's how third density works. We just don't know. We can never know. And we have to use as best we can our powers of discernment to discern what's true and what's false, what's service to self and what's service to others. And so many times, we just never know for sure. Heather, did you have any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
I think that what you guys just touched on, this really to me speaks about discernment. So, in your observation, whatever you're observing, what are you discerning from that? Are you discerning, you know, positive? Are you discerning negative? And I love where it says to embrace falsity, to know it, to seek it, and to use it gives a power that is most great, which is, and then they're saying this in reference to, I believe, the fifth density negative entity that had been, attacking Carla at the time. This is the nature of the power of your visitor and may shed some light upon the power of one who seeks in order to serve others as well. For the missteps in the night are oh so easy. So it's so, like, I think they're saying, it's so easy to not, or to not be able to discern, the dark from the light.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And that can
Yeah,
probably
thank you.
that can be a basis that we can exercise forgiveness for ourselves, maybe, and others. Thanks for highlighting that. Like, we ourselves, like, definitely have many, many times, probably maybe now, or maybe less now as we're on the spiritual path, of like gone into the moonlight, let's say, and so easy, so easy to do that.
I love that too. I like how there's an exclamation point after O, because it reminds me that archetypical mind was clearly something that Ra was like particularly enthusiastic about discussing with Dawn. Whenever Dawn would ask questions about the archetypical mind, Ra would often use like interjections like "Oh, student" with exclamation point to, like, give praise or affirmation to what Dawn was saying. And it's just so weird because Ra is just so technical in their language otherwise and so non-emotional. It reminds me of those few times in Star Trek, the original series, when Mr. Spock would show like actual human emotions or something. It's just like, wow, this is kind of interesting and weird. And they didn't seem to be that enthusiastic about anything else. It was just the archetypical mind. Edgar, did you have any other thoughts, reflections on this passage to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to say just a real quick note on what you said about how happy Ra was when Don asked questions. You actually will believe that the first 75 sessions were just an introduction to the archetype. So that's the way it looked. But I'd like to go back to Trump and your comments initially, because this card really, I need to say I had a pretty comfortable bubble until Trump came to the government. And that's when everything went to hell, and I definitely couldn't embrace falsity. That's actually why I found the low one, because I always believe in extraterrestrial life, and I was like, who is this idiot? I'm not going to follow somebody like this. And then eventually I keep looking, I go, it must be something else. Religion is not going to give me the answer. And then I found the low one. It's like, yes. So in a way, thanks to this idiot, Trump, I found the low one. So this card, it's typical example there. You can see it either way. You can see and embrace the darkness, and you can go on the opposite side and decide service to others. That's really what I did.
Indeed, well said. Yeah, and that whole tactic of knowing falsity and embracing it and using it has been used in so many other countries as well, Latin American countries and Russia and communist China and who knows where else. I like to think it's pretty much a key part of the Orion playbook. It's how they are able to conquest planets and worlds, by making people unsure anymore what's true and what's false, by doubting their grip on reality. Let us go ahead and take a look at the next archetype after this one, which is the Potentiator of the Spirit. In 7811, Ross said, the matrix of the spirit is what you may call the night of the soul, or primeval darkness. Again, we have that which is not capable of movement or work. The potential power of this extremely receptive matrix is such that the potentiator may be seen as lightning. In your archetypical system called the Tarot, this has been refined into the concept complex of the lightning-struck tower. However, the original potentiator was light in its sudden and fiery form, that is, the lightning itself. in 7920. They said the matrix of the spirit is difficult to characterize since the nature of spirit is less motile. The energies and movements of the spirit are by far the most profound yet, having more close association with time-space, do not have the characteristics of dynamic motion. Thusly, one may see the matrix as the deepest darkness and the potentiator of spirit as the most sudden awakening, illuminating, and generative influence. And Kuo once said in a September 23rd, 2001 session, less than 2 weeks after 9/11 attacks, the kingdom of the spirit is a dark one. And we say this not because darkness is evil, for darkness is not evil. We say this because it is the nature of spirit within third density to be largely impossible to see. It is dark because it must be dark, and the light that is the lightning-struck tower, in terms of metaphysics, is a frail and flickering candle of a lightning bolt that is all too quickly extinguished and shows all too little of the hidden landscape of the spirit. Yeah, I love just the pairing of these two archetypes, the matrix of the spirit as darkness and the potentiator of the spirit as being like a bolt of lightning, just a little flash of light that just gives you the barest glimpse of light, and then that leaves you again groping in the moonlight, trying to figure out what's real and what isn't, what's true and what's false. Edgar, do you have any other thoughts, reflections on this particular archetype, these passages?
This would be like my aha moment where I go like, wait, but again, sometimes you're embedded into the illusion and you'll be like, yeah, whatever, that can be right. So that's the way I see this card. It's like, you can listen to it and maybe follow, or you can just say, no, that's not, I'll check it out later on. That's the way I see it.
I like how they point out that the dark is not evil or it's good, it just is. And I think we have been programmed so much from our very, very early childhood that yes, light is good and dark is bad. And it has unfortunately led to all sorts of what I would say is systemic racism against those who just happen to have skin that's darker instead of white. But I think that's a good takeaway lesson from this. These two archetypes is not to be afraid of the dark, to love the dark as the light, and that they both are needed to be complete and whole. Heather, did you have any thoughts, reflections on this archetype?
So kind of in the pairing between this one and the matrix of the spirit, if you were to see the matrix of spirit as the dark, like the dark night of the soul, many people when they start to feel or they start to seek, oftentimes we will see a lot of darkness, and that can lead to a lot of heavy emotions and depression. And then you get to the potentiator of spirit, which is the lightning, which is like, okay, it's like you're asking, you started to ask, you're seeking, you're like, I need something, and that's the lightning bolt is the awakening. So I would say even you could even consider it like a Kundalini awakening. So this is the beginning of the awakening process. And you can even, I like kind of how Edgar related it, is like, here he had all these negative thoughts, about what was going on, and that led him to this beautiful, work of the Law of One. So
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Parsa, anything on this?
Yeah, for sure. I'll add to it. Love the conversation so far. I'll add this interesting quality of lightning that's somewhat random, which you might think of this like, can you control enlightenment? Can you control love? Can you force love? Unfortunately, the answer is no, or maybe probably fortunately, I should say. My friend and my cousin, actually a close friend too, I guess, were talking about this, and we came up with an analogy to describe the spiritual path in a very like rough way. So the goal is this lightning, let's say, from God that illuminates a spirit, and what we want to do obviously is mount a rod that reaches into the sky that increases the odds of the lightning striking us. So what's that rod? I think maybe we can think of that rod as desire because they talk about LL research quote desire so key, and the universe gives you what you desire. And I think that concept is meant to be used in a spiritual way. It's more because the universe is spiritual. So the spiritual desire, the desire to be one with God, desire for truth, love, etc., and also meditation. So the technical aspect. So taking away the other influences. And then what is the mind and the body? The way I'm thinking of it right now, the mind and body is like that pyramid in that image where the rod is in the center of the pyramid. And the point of developing the mind and the body is that when the lightning strikes you, you don't die, because it's going to be very intense and the light can be very powerful. People taking psychedelics or certain types of psychedelics could attest to that. And there's a reason we're not open to those energies all the time. It's because the creator's merciful and only gives you what you can handle. So in a sense, I see the point of developing those two is creating a stable base so that you don't go, you don't completely embody the archetype of the fool when you get enlightened, let's say. Like
Fascinating. That is the next archetype we're going to look at. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Again, I never thought of it that way. It never occurred to me to think of it that way. Thank you for sharing. Andy, did you have any thoughts, reflections on this archetype or these passages?
Yeah, I like to use analogies a lot. So for me, this card is like, it's like being in a really, really dark room and you have to find a key. And let's say the floor is just covered in keys that are not the key that you want, but the key that you want is there somewhere and it's completely dark, right? And every now and then you get a flash of lightning that kind of gives you, a clue of where that key might be. So the keys are, for instance, different religions or philosophies. The key, there's like, but the key you seek is the key, and you're seeking it in this darkness, and every now and again you get an aha moment, which is like the flash of lightning, but that is the nature of seeking in the 3D, finding this key in the dark place. And
yeah, and as somebody said, I think Parsa just now, you don't have control over when the lightning flashes. It's just random, unless you use a lightning rod to try to increase the probability. Thank you for sharing that. We have one last archetype we are going to look at, and we are approaching the 2-hour mark. So I'd say we're going to be running a little bit longer than usual today, but hopefully our viewers will agree that it was worth it. This is archetype 22, or the choice. And in 6730, Ross said, one great aspect of this archetype is the aspect of faith, the walking into space without regard for what is to come next. This is, of course, foolish, but it is part of the characteristic of the spiritual neophyte. And in September 1994, Kuo said, we have been speaking this day of the choice that is represented by the 22nd archetype known as the Fool. The entire process of seeking within your third density illusion is one in which you become the Fool. It is a process which contains the, as your Bible has called it, the valley of the shadow of death. There is in this process a rod and a staff, which comforts those who walk through the valley of the shadow of death. These are the will and the faith components that ring throughout each archetypical image and are as the guiding star. For the faith that this process will end well must be fueled by the will to persevere. Thus, there is the threat of the falling to one's death, the being eaten alive by the illusion, the inability to see the danger about one, for it is all about one in darkness, it would seem. Thus, the image of the Fool is well suited to your illusion and is given as that motto by which each might look for inspiration and illumination of the heart. We speak of the heart, for there the love of the Creator may be found and experienced for the self and for all other selves as the self which is the seeker, which continues to place itself in positions similar to the walking from the cliff, willing to be vulnerable and to give without expectation of return. The archetype is the most active archetype, shall we say. Though it is the last to be mastered, it is the first to be called and the one to be called most often, my friends. really, again, there's so much to look at in here. And I guess one of the things that stands out to me is that interesting figure of the cross that's on the chest of the person here. It looks like a big Christian cross over the earth, over the world. And again, it just calls back again to all those other places where we've seen 90-degree angles and crossed legs, suggesting this idea of sacrifice. Everything that we do in this incarnation could be seen as a sacrifice. And it could be a sacrifice of love if we make it that way. And I guess the other thing that stands out here is the importance of will and faith here, and the need for both of those in order to persevere and to do what we came here to do in this incarnation. Andy, any thoughts, reflections on this archetype?
Yeah, I love this. I love any kind of like mystical figures that are funny. And this to me, it's just, it's like, says to me, we don't know. It's all about allowing it. You don't know what you're walking into. And like you said, sacrifice of expectations, sacrifice of control, and just allowing whatever it is to unfold. Just like, like classic books like Candide, and I don't know if you're aware of the Mad Mang Zigong, stories where like you've got these main characters who go out there not knowing what to expect, and then like all these wonderful things happen to them, some of them not so wonderful, but we grow as a result. So yeah, it's lovely. Thank you.
It is beautiful indeed. Yeah, thank you. Edgar, any thoughts, reflections?
Yeah, remembering that we are the creator, we're actually learning, and the way that you learn is by not being biased. The choice is just that. You're gonna explore more when you don't know where you're going, so you're gonna be able to go pretty much everywhere, since it's infinite what we're talking about. This card basically symbolizes that. You're gonna go through dangers, you're gonna go through suffering, pain, but your faith will keep you going, and your will, like they said on the staff, is what allows you to continue. And at the end, the creator will be able to find himself, like learn more. And that's what I like this card. It basically sums the whole reason why the whole archetypes are there. It's just to allow you to make the creator bigger by learning more.
Indeed. And that's what it all seems to be about. Everything is about the one infinite creator, intelligent infinity, always wanting to understand more, never satisfied with what it's got. Heather, any thoughts, reflections on this?
Yeah, so the choice card, which I think, represents our will, our free will to choose. What do we choose? Do we choose to walk in faith? But then looking at the card, I think it's interesting if where the circle is over the solar plexus, and then the cross moves from the solar plexus up to the heart. So if you think we're moving from yellow to green, like it's symbolizing what we're doing here, right? We're moving from third density to fourth density, and I love that he's blind, because it is a blind faith in which we have to make these choices.
Absolutely. Parsa, any thoughts, reflections to share?
I have to say, I didn't notice what Heather was mentioning. That's so interesting. Because I'm just thinking about it now, so I don't have anything to comment on that, unfortunately, to think about it. But what Edgar was saying, going to go back full circle to the start of our conversation about the seeker's path, including suffering. I think it ties into the hero's journey in a sense that it's what resonates with you. It's the adventure of reality in a way. And a way I conceptualize, or one aspect of this choice that I think also ties into our discussion of the transformation of the mind and the significator of the body, is the choice of idealism, let's say, or the idealism of the positive hero. Like at any moment you can, we were discussing perspectives to reality. Do you want your do you choose your perspective to be idealistic? Do you hold light at the top? Like, do you see some redeeming, some redemption, or do you want to be cynical? Not to judge anyone who's cynical. We're all cynical sometimes. It's something about this. When I feel so ashamed sometimes when I come to our meditation groups, because the idealism and purity of everyone there, it reminds me about how cynical I've been. And then like it's like, whoa, like I feel like I have to repent to God for being so
Oh no.
yeah.
I hope we don't talk too much about repentance and the law of one. Good Lord.
Well, oh yeah, sure. But the way I think of repentance, it's like, obviously in the law of one ontology, there's no hell, there's no like disproportional like disciplining of negative action, but it's like there's an infinite creator that loves you infinitely. And when you see that, I think repentance is just the natural reaction of, just because our distorted selves being like sad, like, oh, why was I like doing this thing to the God? But the creator's like, oh, it doesn't matter, but it's a natural reaction we have. It's like, oh, like fuck, like maybe I should have like been, more like more service to others, more idealistic, and so forth. So yeah, I think in a sense we're the heroes, and we could be heroes of idealism, of joy, of love, and all that good stuff, to see everything try to see everything in a positive light, in a way to redeem them. And let me share something else I find so inspiring. A huge disclaimer, like because it's going on YouTube, like this does not advocate for any type of like self-harm or danger or anything, but something the law of one mentioned, but maybe that should be taken allegorically, is that like, don't you want to live like a dangerous life, like the path of the seeker, like that you're following God? It's a dangerous life, and it's like, live your life in a risky manner. You're gonna die anyway, so why not like take the risk and be adventurous? And why not be adventurous and risky for positive ideals?
Yeah, and I think my understanding is in that context, they're thinking about taking the risk of that leap of faith, which this choice card is all about. It's taking the leap of faith to choose love and to choose the path of service to others, even though the world seems to have an apparent bias towards service to self. That is kind of, again, to me, it kind of calls back to what we were saying in the beginning, how understanding the archetypical mind helps you understand the blueprint. And when you realize that you're not just imagining that the world seems to be like really crazy and messed up, it was designed to appear that way in order to test your ability to choose love over fear and to choose service to others over service to self, even though the world seems to really want you to do service to self. That, I think, is a great leap of faith and a risk-taking for anyone to take. Did anybody have any thoughts, reflections before we move on and wrap this up? As far as where do we go from here, a couple perhaps takeaway lessons to consider. I would think one important lesson is to choose service to others or service to self and commit. Most people really have no idea that there is such a choice to be made. So that is kind of the point of why we are doing these podcast videos, to let you know that life is not random and that you do actually have a purpose here, and that your purpose is to make a choice to think of others at least as much as you think of yourself, or to think of just yourself. And either way are legitimate paths to the creator, but you do have to choose one or the other and commit. Second takeaway, a lesson I would think, is to see the self and the universe as magical. The very first archetype is indeed the magician, and as they are pointing out, we are inherently magical beings, and the universe itself is inherently magical because everything is the one infinite creator. And the more that you believe in that sort of magical ability, the more it can become true for you. And you can see magical things happening in your life, and you can help magical things happening. But it also helps if, number 3, you see yourself as a suitor rather than a plunderer. Approaching these spiritual teachings, approaching your subconscious mind as the suitor with bouquet and candy, and being humbled, I think, as Edgar was suggesting before, rather than being arrogant, and rather being a plunderer and just taking things by force. Fourth takeaway lesson might be, again, remembering who you are and why you're here. I keep remembering a passage where Kuo said that if you do a little bit of digging, Each person here will find little gems of love and wisdom that we planted with our higher selves, just deep enough below our subconscious minds so that we would find joy in discovering them. And that might inspire us to continue digging. Because when you remember who you are and why you're here, then beautiful things can happen indeed. And lastly, to love the dark and the light. That's the lesson of the matrix of the spirit and the potentiator of the spirit. To not be afraid of the dark, to love the dark and embrace it as much as the light so that we can become whole. Indeed. Panelists, any last thoughts, reflections on any of this before we have a little pop quiz? How about Heather? Any thoughts, reflections on anything here?
I just
Last thoughts, reflections?
yeah, I just want to say it was
Really fun. You know, for the last month or so, I felt like I really tried to like deep dive into the archetypical mind and even kind of the history of like where it came from and how the galactic logos, you know, presented it to our solar logos and how it was created really, you know, by Ra on Venus, you know, our particular blueprint, or the way they describe the archetypes. So it's just been, there's so much, I think, to explore, but it's been super fun, and I'm really grateful to have everybody here as a fun resource. It's been great.
Sure, appreciate your being here, Heather. Thank you. Parsa, any last thoughts, reflections on this whole thing?
I'll say, well, at the start of this, all of you were discussing how like, oh, like there's so much to talk about, we won't like be able to get through it all. I was like, oh, no way, we have like 3 hours. I was like, oh my God, we didn't even scratch the surface at all. Like, you guys are totally right. We didn't even scratch the surface.
For sure. But that leaves more for future episodes, right?
Yes.
Indeed. Andy, any last thoughts, reflections?
I just want to say I've learned so much just in the last 2 hours, and you know, like I've been studying these archetypes for 4 years, and I still feel like I have no fucking idea what it's all about. But every time I talk to someone about it, I learn something new, and you know, and I've learned so much from all of you. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this session.
I always enjoy listening to your British accent, Andy. You could read off a laundry list and I would go ahead and listen to that for half an hour. This is great. No idea. Edgar, any last thoughts, reflections?
Well, thank you for inviting me. It definitely is beautiful. Just again, remind our viewers, future viewers, that meditation is the key, silent meditation, and that all the answers to all your trouble are inside you. So just try it. You'll see how eventually you see that little light that will start guiding you, and you feel better and better each day. So it was fun. I really learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And yes, I could listen to your accent for half an hour if you just wanted to read a laundry list too. You are welcome to do that. Otherwise, yes, it is time for a little pop quiz. Pop quizzes are just some things that we like to do at the end of our sessions to lighten things up at the end of some otherwise heavy discussions, and add a little bit of pop culture to the Law of One just for fun. So panelists, you know a bit about the archetypical mind found in the deepest parts of our unconscious world, but how much do you know about the typical arches found in pretty much every part of our conscious world? I am, of course, referring specifically to the golden arches known as McDonald's. According to surveys around the world, more people recognize the McDonald's arches than the Christian cross that we have alluded to so many times today. This is clearly a blasphemy against the Christian church and the archetypical mind. So today I'm going to ask you 3 multiple choice questions about this cultural icon, this abomination of our spiritual landscape. Let's see how many you can guess correctly. Those watching on video, go ahead and say your answers out loud. We can hear you through the TV. And as always, the points don't matter. If you had fun, you won. Panelists, are you ready for your first question? All right, your first question is, what other fast food chain did McDonald's own majority stock in for 8 years? Was it A, Panda Express, B, Pizza Hut, or C, Chipotle?
I'll
What do
say
you
B.
I hear a B. Anybody else?
I'm gonna go with B as well.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, B, I think.
I'll say C. I don't know.
Nice. The correct answer is, in fact, C, Chipotle. McDonald's invested in Chipotle back in 1998, back when there were only 16 of them around the country. But by 2006, McDonald's owned 90% of Chipotle, which had grown to 500 locations, and decided to sell that stock in order to focus on the crappy food of their own instead. Which leads us, of course, to the big question, which is fast food. What's your fast food guilty pleasure? Does anybody have a fast food guilty pleasure? I do like fast food burgers from time to time, and fries and onion rings. Does
In-N-Out
anybody
burger.
else?
In-N-Out
Anybody else
burger.
ever eat fast food at all?
Sausage and
shaking.
egg McMuffin, I'd go to hell for that. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
know if that's on the menu, but like when I was pregnant with my daughter, I had it at least. I'd sneak off. I'd get up early in the morning and sneak off and get one before everyone else woke up.
Yeah, there is something about it that satisfies early in the morning for sure. Heather,
I'd go-
Edgar, you guys trash
go
your
with
body with any of this stuff?
Burger King onion rings. Yeah,
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
reminiscent of my childhood. So yeah, love those.
Nice.
I'm a pig, so I'll go for the In-N-Out 4x4 with a chocolate shake. I'll die for that.
Ooh, you trailer park burger slut. In-N-Out burgers, yeah, for sure. That's got to be one of the best. I know Anthony Bourdain said that was like his favorite fast food burger place. Are you ready for your second question? Your second question is, what is a quarter pounder with cheese called in France? Is it A, a royale with cheese, B, a royal cheese, or C, a cheese royale?
Where did you get those questions, Mike?
From the deepest parts of my subconscious mind.
I think I remember something about this from a Quentin Tarantino movie
I think you do. The
where,
question is, how well do you remember it?
oh, I think the answer's A from my recollection of the conversation. What film was it? No, it wasn't Kill.
We'll get to that in a minute. Parsa,
Okay.
Heather, Edgar,
I'll
any
go with
thoughts?
A.
I'll go with C.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll piggyback. I'll go with A because with isn't even a French word, so it must be you're trying to trick us, but it's probably the correct answer.
In the Quentin Tarantino movie Pulp Fiction, there was a classic scene between Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta where they were talking about this very thing. And in the movie, John Travolta said he had gone to France and he said they called it the Royale with cheese. But apparently, in reality, the correct answer is B. In France, they actually call it the Royal cheese. Go figure. Anyone else a huge fan of Samuel L. Jackson? Raise your hand if you're a fan of Samuel L. Jackson. Oh, he has made so many great movies, not just Snakes on a Plane. His whole Nick Fury and the Marvel movies are great. The Hitman's
Die
Bodyguard.
Hard. Die Hard also.
Oh, God, such a great actor. I would love to meet that guy. You have any favorite Samuel Jackson movies, Edgar?
Well, of course, Star Wars, Mace
That's
Windu.
right.
He's the best.
I forgot about that. Yeah. He has been in so many great movies. Are you ready for your last question? Your last question is this. Which athlete claimed to have eaten about 1,000 chicken McNuggets while competing at one of the Olympics? Was it A, Usain Bolt, B, Michael Phelps, or C, Carl Lewis? 1,000 chicken McNuggets while competing at the Olympics.
I'll go with Michael Phelps, in
Same.
case he got the munchies.
Well played. A little bit of insider information there. Yes, indeed. What do you think?
I'm gonna go with A, just maybe because he runs them off really quick.
Nice. Andy, Parsa?
E.
I don't know. It's kind of hard to eat and run at the same time, though, isn't it? But you can eat inside.
Well, you're not supposed to swim either until at least 45 minutes after eating 1,000 chicken McNuggets.
Yeah, Michael Phelps, I think.
I would have gone for Michael Phelps too. I would have gone for this donor vote, but that was a decoy. The correct answer is, in fact, Usain Bolt. The Jamaican runner claims to have eaten about 1,000 of them while competing in the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. But apparently he still won 3 gold medals and set 3 world records. So say what you will about McDonald's, but apparently it worked well for that dude. Did anyone watch the most recent Olympic Games in Paris? Edgar says no. Andy says no. Parsa says no. Heather, did you
Yep,
watch any of that?
I watched a little bit, yep.
Any parts that you enjoyed in particular?
I enjoyed the break dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun. Did you watch a lot of it? I only caught a little bit of it.
I watched yeah, I'd say I watched like at least the semifinals, the finals, yeah, of the males for sure. It was good. Very, very good.
I
Fun
really
to see that
enjoyed
in the
it.
Olympics, right?
This was the first time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope it's not the last time. I hope they don't cancel it. I had heard that they were not going to do it in LA, and I'm thinking LA of all places. That would be awesome for it. I don't know. I think perhaps the thing I enjoyed most about the Olympics was watching, what's her name, Simone Biles. Such an incredible testament to will and faith. For folks who don't know, she is one of the world's most decorated gymnasts or Olympic athletes, period. And she had to withdraw from several events at the last Olympics in Tokyo because she was experiencing what is known in the business as the twisties. The twisties is when, in her case, she's doing the most incredible, difficult aerobatic gymnastic moves that nobody else does. And when she experiences the twisties, it means basically she loses contact between her mind and her body. That connection is severed. So she's spinning around up there like all get out, and she has no idea what's going to happen when she lands. She has no control over her body. And that obviously would be a very life-threatening, career-ending thing to happen when competing at that level. So she had to withdraw from several events, and she was open about saying it was a mental health thing. So just to, in those 4 years, to go through all the therapy to overcome that fear, overcome that problem, return to the Olympics with all the pressure of the world watching what was going to happen to her, and still being able to do it and still win gold medals afterwards. And that's at age 27, meaning she's one of the oldest people to ever compete in gymnastics ever. That's just such an amazing testament to her will and faith, since I believe she's a practicing Catholic. Just amazing. Panelists, I am again so delighted and so joyed and thankful for having everybody here. Did anybody have any last thoughts they wanted to share before we say goodbye to our viewers? Edgar, any last thoughts? Any last goodbyes want to share?
No, again, just thank you for being with us. Remember, this was all planned. It's no accidents, and it's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's an honor for us, for sure. Andy, any last goodbyes want to say?
Just thank you for your time, and I just want to repeat that the best way to work with the archetypes is to meditate on them.
That is a great takeaway lesson. Parsa?
What's coming to me is the passage about the heart of the evolution of spirit being unity, love, light, and joy. Not necessarily techniques per se, but unity, love, light, and joy. Yeah, it was great. Thanks.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Heather?
Yeah, just reiterating, thank you as well. It was super fun to learn with everybody, and all is well. That's what's coming to me. Thank you.
Indeed. It's been a joy. Panelists, thank you for all you've done and continue to do in service to others. To all our friends at L&L Research, thank you for all you've done and continue to do in service to others. For everyone who's watching this video at some other place in space and time in the near future or distant future, thank you for all you've done and continue to do in service to others. We are sending you our love and we are receiving yours. Until next time, in the love and light of the one infinite creator. Adonai. Namaste.